Welcome to my Channel Deep Sleep Mission-DSM. As we begin, I would be delighted if you could share your location in the comments below. It's truly inspiring to witness how far this content travels and to connect with viewers from across the world. Have you ever driven past an abandoned building and felt a chill run down your spine? Like something was watching you from behind those broken windows? Well, I'm about to tell you about my experience with the old Raven Creek jailhouse in rural Vermont, and why I can't sleep with the lights off anymore. If you've ever felt that unexplainable dread in certain places, you'll understand exactly what I went through. This story has never been shared publicly before, and I'm still not sure if I should be telling it now, but I need to know if anyone else has experienced something similar. Let me know in the comments if any part of this resonates with you, or if you've ever encountered the shadows that move when they shouldn't. I never believed in ghosts, until I spent a night in Raven Creek jailhouse. My name is Daniel Whitaker, and I'm a historical preservation photographer from Boston. 2 months ago, I was commissioned to document abandoned historical buildings across New England before their demolition. Just an overnight trip, Sarah had said, sliding the folder across her desk. The county's tearing it down next month. Get there before sunset for the best exterior shots, then capture the interior the following morning. I flipped through the preliminary information. Raven Creek Jailhouse, built 1872, closed 1963. Notable for its unique stone architecture and... I paused at a handwritten note in the margin. Local reluctance? Sarah shrugged. Small-town superstition? Nothing unusual. The drive to Raven Creek was picturesque. I arrived in the tiny town around 3 in the afternoon. I stopped at the diner, figuring I could grab a late lunch and ask for directions. The bell jingled cheerfully as I entered, but the conversation died immediately. 5 or 6 locals turned to stare. A middle-aged waitress behind the counter froze with a coffee pot in hand. "Afternoon," I said, sliding onto a stool. "Just passing through. Could I get a menu?" The waitress, her name tag read Maggie, seemed to recover. "Of course, honey. Just not used to strangers this time of year." She placed a laminated menu before me, then leaned in slightly. "What brings you to our little town?" "I'm photographing the old jailhouse for historical documentation before the demolition." The diner went completely silent. An elderly man at the end of the counter set down his coffee cup with a sharp click. "You don't want to do that, son." I turned toward him, expecting to see the twinkle of someone telling a spooky story to the out-of-towner, but his weathered face was deadly serious. "The jailhouse isn't a place for camping," he continued. "Especially not after dark." "Frank," Maggie warned, but he waved her off. "Boy should know before he goes traipsing in there with his camera." I smiled politely. "I appreciate the concern, but I've stayed in all sorts of abandoned buildings. Comes with the job." Frank shook his head slowly. "Not like this one. Not like Raven Creek." He headed for the door, then paused. "If you insist on staying, don't go into the east wing after sunset. And whatever you hear, don't answer it." As I paid my bill, Maggie slid a small bottle across the counter. "Salt. For the doorways," she said quietly. Just in case." 20 minutes later, I was driving down an overgrown road that wound through dense woods. The trees suddenly parted, and there it was. Raven Creek Jailhouse loomed against the late afternoon sky. A massive stone structure with narrow windows like suspicious eyes. The main building was 3 stories of dark granite, with 2 wings extending like arms waiting to embrace unwary visitors. I parked and set up my tent in the former exercise yard. As darkness fell, the temperature dropped sharply. Around midnight, I crawled into my sleeping bag, setting my alarm for pre-dawn. I don't know what woke me. My watch read 3:17 a.m. Something had pulled me from a deep sleep. Some noise, or there it was again. A faint metallic sound. like a key turning in a distant lock. Then footsteps, slow, measured, moving across what must have been the main hall of the jailhouse. A light appeared in one of the second-floor windows. Not the flickering beam of a flashlight, but a steady yellow glow, like an old oil lamp. I reached for my phone to document it, thinking perhaps some local teenagers had decided to explore the supposedly haunted jail. But as I watched, a figure passed before the light. The silhouette was unmistakably that of a man in what appeared to be a formal suit from another era. He moved with purpose, pausing to look out the window directly toward my tent. Even from this distance, I had the distinct impression he could see me. I pulled on my boots and grabbed my flashlight. The heavy iron door to the main entrance was ajar, though I distinctly remembered photographing it closed earlier. "Hello?" I called out, my voice swallowed by the emptiness. "The building's condemned. You shouldn't be in here." No response. I approached the staircase, intent on finding the source of the light I'd seen. The wood creaked ominously beneath my weight as I ascended. At the top, a long corridor stretched in both directions. I turned right toward where I'd seen the light. A door at the end of the hall stood open, a faint glow spilling from within. The warden's office, if I remembered correctly. An oil lamp burned on the desk, though there was no one in sight. Beside it lay an open ledger, the pages yellowed with age. I approached, drawn by the impossibility of the lit lamp. "I wouldn't do that if I were you, Mr. Whitaker." I whirled around. A man stood in the doorway, though I hadn't heard him approach. Tall and gaunt, dressed in a dark suit that might have been fashionable a century ago. His face was deeply lined, with piercing eyes beneath heavy brows. "How do you know my name?" I demanded, backing away. "I make it my business to know who enters my jailhouse," he replied. His voice cultured but with an undercurrent that raised the hair on my arms. Just as Warden Pierce did before me, and Warden Collins before him. "This building is scheduled for demolition," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "The county owns it now." He laughed, a sound like dry leaves scraping across stone. "Ownership is such a temporary concept, Mr. Whitaker. Some ties run deeper than mere paper deeds." He gestured to the ledger on the desk. "Your name, it's already been entered." I glanced down at the book and felt ice shoot through my veins. There, on the open page, in elegant script that seemed to glisten wetly in the lamplight, was my name. Daniel James Whitaker. "This isn't funny," I said, looking up. But the doorway was empty. The man had vanished. And with him, the lamp. The ledger, too, was gone. Just a dust-covered desk remained. I backed out of the office, heart pounding. Then turned and ran. For the rest of the night, I lay awake, listening to the sounds of keys turning and doors opening, footsteps pacing methodically through the halls. Occasionally, voices drifted across the yard, murmured conversations, muffled cries. Once a laugh so filled with malice it made me pull my sleeping bag over my head like a child hiding from monsters. When dawn finally broke, I was already packing my equipment. Ready to leave? Assignment be damned. But as I looked up at the jailhouse in the harsh light of morning, I hesitated. It looked ordinary. Had I imagined the entire encounter? I had a job to do, and I needed the payment this assignment would bring. I could complete my work quickly and be on the road by noon. How wrong I was. Morning sunlight streamed through the broken windows as I worked methodically, photographing the main hall, the administrative offices, and the central cell block. By mid-morning, I'd completed most of the assignment. Only the east wing remained. I stood at the entrance to the corridor that would lead me there, remembering Frank's warning. Don't go into the east wing after sunset. Well, it wasn't sunset. It was 11:24 a.m. according to my watch. I adjusted my camera strap and stepped through the heavy iron door that separated the east wing from the main building. The atmosphere changed immediately. The air became noticeably colder, with a damp, musty scent that caught in my throat. The East Wing had been built specifically to house problem inmates and those awaiting execution. The isolation cells were at the far end, small, windowless rooms designed to break the spirit through sensory deprivation. The corridor stretched before me, cells lining both sides, most with their doors hanging open. Unlike the main cell block with its rows of bars, these were solid metal doors with small observation slots. At the end of the corridor, a final door stood partially open. Beyond lay a short hallway with 5 doors, all closed. The isolation cells. I approached the first door, which featured a heavier lock and the words, "Isolation 1 inch" stenciled in fading paint. I tried the handle, but it wouldn't budge. Locked, after all these years. I moved to the second door. This one opened with a groan of metal against concrete. The cell was tiny, with walls of solid concrete. No window, no furniture except for a metal frame that might once have held a thin mattress. I stepped inside, the smell of mildew and something else, something coppery and organic, filling my nostrils. I raised my camera, focusing on the far wall where someone had scratched a single word repeatedly into the concrete. Innocent. As I adjusted my aperture for the dim conditions, a whisper came from behind me, so faint I almost missed it. They never believe us. I spun around, but the doorway was empty, just the dark corridor beyond. "Hello," I called, my voice sounding small in the confined space. Silence. Then, from one of the other cells, a sound like fingernails dragging slowly across metal. The temperature had dropped dramatically. I could see my breath now. "Who's there?" I demanded. "This is private property." A low chuckle came from the cell at the end of the hallway, Isolation 5. The door marked with a small red cross. "Private." The voice was male, rough, as if its owner had screamed until his vocal cords shredded. "Nothing's private here. Not your thoughts, not your fears, not your soul." I began backing toward the exit. "I'm leaving now." "Are you?" Another voice, this one from Isolation 3, female and oddly young sounding. "No one leaves, not really." The lights in the corridor flickered, which should have been impossible, as the power had been cut decades ago. For a moment, darkness enveloped me, and in that instant I felt something brush against my cheek. A touch so cold it burned. When the light stabilized, a woman stood before me. She wore a faded dress that might once have been blue, her dark hair pulled back severely from a pale face. But it was her eyes that froze the scream in my throat. Completely black, like pools of ink, with no whites visible at all. "You have his face," she whispered, raising a hand toward me. "You have my Thomas's face." "I'm not Thomas. My name is Daniel." "They all say that at first," came the male voice again. "They all deny it, until the warden makes them remember." The woman flickered like a bad television signal, then reappeared directly beside me. "Thomas, why did you leave me here? You promised to come back." Something slammed against one of the closed isolation doors. A heavy, rhythmic pounding that shook dust from the ceiling. Then another door began to rattle, as if something, was trying desperately to get out. The woman's face contorted with rage, her mouth opening impossibly wide. "Liar!" she shrieked, the sound piercing my eardrums like physical pain. I ran, dropping my camera as I bolted past her down the corridor towards the exit. I reached the heavy iron door and yanked on the handle. It didn't move. Locked. "The warden has the keys," said a voice directly behind me. "He always has the keys." I turned slowly. The woman stood there, but now her dress was wet, dripping a dark liquid onto the floor. Her face was different too, bloated, the skin mottled with patches of blue and purple. "They said I drowned myself," she said conversationally, "in the wash basin. But how does one hold oneself underwater? Thomas knows the truth. The warden knows." From further down the corridor came the sound of more doors opening, shuffling footsteps approaching, multiple sets. "They're coming," the woman said, her black eyes widening. "You should hide. They're hungry after so long." The door behind me suddenly swung open. I stumbled backward through it into the main building. The woman made no move to follow. I slammed the door shut. A key turned in the lock with a decisive click. I jumped away, staring at the old-fashioned keyhole as it rotated seemingly on its own. "That won't hold them for long," said a familiar, cultured voice. "Nothing holds the truly vengeful for long, especially those with legitimate grievances." I turned to find the gaunt man from the previous night standing a few feet away. In his hand he held a ring of large iron keys. "Who are you?" I demanded. "Warden Malcolm Pierce, at your service." He gave a small, mocking bow. "Last official warden of Raven Creek Jailhouse. Though my tenure continues unofficially, you might say." "You're dead," I stated flatly. He raised an eyebrow. "Did I? How careless of me not to notice." He jingled the keys thoughtfully. "Death is a flexible concept in this place, Mr. Whitaker. More of a reassignment than an ending." From behind the iron door came a renewed pounding, more insistent now. Multiple fists hammering in an arrhythmic chorus that made the hinges rattle. "You should run now," he suggested mildly. "Make it sporting for them at least. They do so enjoy a chase." I backed away, then turned and sprinted down the main corridor toward the entrance. Behind me, I heard the distinct sound of the east wing door being unlocked. Pierce's voice floated after me, calm and almost bored. "Run all you like, Mr. Whitaker, but remember, your name is in the ledger now, and no one leaves Raven Creek. Not entirely." I burst through the main doors into the daylight, expecting to feel relief, but the sunlight seemed diminished somehow. I was halfway across the yard when I realized the light was wrong. The sun was setting. I checked my watch in disbelief, 5:43 p.m., but that was impossible. I'd entered the east wing before noon. I couldn't have been inside for nearly 6 hours. I ran for my car, no longer caring about my equipment. The important thing was to get away, to put as much distance as possible between myself and Raven Creek Jailhouse before full darkness fell. It wasn't until I checked into a motel 3 towns over that I discovered what was in my camera bag. The ledger from the warden's office, ancient leather binding cracked with age, the pages yellowed and brittle. With trembling fingers I opened it. My name was there, just as I'd seen the night before, Daniel James Whitaker, written in what looked disturbingly like dried blood, and beneath it, in the same hand, temporary release granted, return expected. 3 weeks passed. I delivered the photos I'd managed to take, making excuses about equipment failure for the missing shots of the isolation cells. I tried to resume my normal life, but a heaviness had settled over me, a constant awareness that something had changed fundamentally during my night at Raven Creek. It was exactly 1 month after my visit to the jailhouse when the dreams intensified. No longer fragments, but fully realized narratives that felt more like memories than imagination. I was walking through the East Wing, not as Daniel the photographer, but as someone else. Someone who moved with authority, keys jingling at his belt. Inmates pressed against their cell doors as I passed, some begging, others cursing. I ignored them all. My destination fixed, the isolation cells. She was waiting in the last one, her dark hair down around her shoulders. Not drowned, not yet. Still alive, still hopeful. "You came back," she whispered, reaching through the bars for my hand. "I knew you would. You promised." My voice, not my voice, replied, "I'll always come back for you, Maria. I've spoken to the warden. One more week, then we'll have the money. One more week, and we'll be free. I began to research obsessively. Old newspaper archives, county records, anything I could find about Raven Creek Jailhouse and its history. Maria Velasquez had existed, convicted of manslaughter in 1943, sentenced to 20 years. Reported to have committed suicide in 1945 while in disciplinary confinement. Thomas Carter had existed too, a guard who disappeared the same night Maria died. Presumed to have fled with stolen funds, his body was never found. 6 weeks after my visit to Raven Creek, I woke at exactly 3:17 a.m., the same time I'd been awakened that first night at the jailhouse. Something had changed in my apartment. The air felt different, heavier, charged with a presence that pressed against my skin like static electricity. Then I heard it. The slow, measured sound of footsteps in my living room. The deliberate pace I'd come to recognize from my dreams. Thomas walking the corridors of Raven Creek. "You've been avoiding me, Mr. Whitaker." Warden Pierce's cultured voice drifted through my bedroom door. "Most impolite. After I granted you temporary release." I sat up. "This isn't real. You can't be here." A soft chuckle. "Your understanding of can and cannot is remarkably limited, a common failing of the living." My bedroom door swung open. Pierce stood in the doorway, the ledger I'd locked away in my closet in his hands. "The demolition begins tomorrow," Pierce said, snapping the ledger shut. "The county finally stopped delaying. They're tearing down my jailhouse at dawn." A ripple of agitation passed through the assembled spirits behind him. Some moaned softly, others simply faded and reappeared, like reception failing on an old television. "What does that have to do with me?" I asked, though part of me already knew the answer. "Everything ends, Mr. Whitaker. Even hauntings. Unless—" He let the word hang in the air between us. "Unless what?" "Unless the spirits find a new home." The coldness I'd felt in the jailhouse seeped into my bedroom, frosting the windows. Maria stepped forward, her eyes, human eyes now, brown with flecks of gold, fixed on mine with desperate hope. "Thomas," she whispered, "you promised you'd come back for me." "I'm not Thomas," I said, but the denial sounded hollow even to my own ears. "No," Pierce agreed. "You're not Thomas Carter. Not exactly, but you share something with him, a bloodline perhaps, a connection we can use." "Use for what?" "A vessel," said another voice, the man from Isolation Cell 5. "A host." "You misunderstand," Pierce said, almost gently. "We're not asking permission. We're simply explaining the process. Your name is in the ledger, Mr. Whitaker." Maria moved to the foot of my bed, her form flickering between the beautiful young woman she had been and the drowned corpse she had become. "It won't hurt," she promised. "Not for long, and then we'll be together, like we planned." The spirits surged forward suddenly. Not just Maria, but dozens of others. Guards and inmates spanning decades of Raven Creek's dark history. They fell upon me like a wave, their spectral forms passing through my flesh with a cold that burned worse than fire. Through it all, Pierce watched with detached interest. Only when my struggles began to weaken did he approach, leaning down until his gaunt face filled my dimming vision. "Death is just a reassignment, Mr. Whitaker," he repeated. "Your body will be found eventually. Heart failure, they'll say. Tragic for one so young. But you won't be gone, just relocated. To a place where you belong." The room began to fade, darkness creeping in from the edges of my sight. The last thing I saw was Maria's face, luminous with a terrible joy as she whispered, "Together at last, my Thomas. Just like you promised." Then there was nothing but darkness and the sensation of falling. I died in my apartment in Boston on October 17th, or at least Daniel Whitaker did. I woke in a cell in the east wing of Raven Creek Jailhouse. The demolition had been delayed again. Budget issues, according to the county commissioner. The building still stood, and within its walls, so did we. Time moves differently here. Sometimes I'm Daniel, sometimes I'm Thomas. Sometimes I'm something in between. A hybrid consciousness born of two men separated by decades but united by a curse neither understood until too late. Maria visits often, her appearance shifting between the beautiful woman Thomas loved and the drowned corpse Daniel feared. She doesn't seem to notice the difference anymore. To her, I am simply her Thomas, returned as promised. Pierce keeps us all organized, maintaining his ledger with meticulous care. Each name a soul bound to Raven Creek, each entry a story of how they came to be trapped here. I've learned to move beyond the walls, to reach out across distances in those hours when the veil between worlds grows thin. And sometimes, when the conditions are just right, I can reach further still. To you, sitting there listening to this story in the darkness, you felt it just now, didn't you? That sudden chill across the back of your neck, the sense that you're not quite alone anymore. That's how it begins. That's how it always begins. Because the truth about Raven Creek Jailhouse isn't just that it's haunted. It's that its haunting spreads, like a contagion passing from one vulnerable soul to another. Through stories, through images, through the simple act of knowing it exists. You know about it now. Your name is already taking form in Pierce's ledger, written in ink that glistens wetly in the lamplight. And someday, when you least expect it, you'll wake at exactly 3:17 a.m. to the sound of footsteps in your home, measured, unhurried, confident. The footsteps of someone who has all of eternity to wait for your return. If you enjoyed this story, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more tales that will keep you up at night. Leave a comment below if you've ever experienced that inexplicable chill that makes you certain you're being watched. Do you believe old buildings can hold on to the souls that suffered within their walls? And if you happen to be passing through Vermont and see signs for a small town called Raven Creek, well, I'd recommend you keep driving. Some places are best left unexplored, some stories best left untold. Sleep well tonight, if you can. Story number 2. Picture this for a moment. You're watching security footage from last Tuesday. Everything looks normal. A jogger runs past at 6:47 a.m. But when you blink, they're gone. Not around the corner. Not out of frame. Just gone. Mid-stride. Like they never existed at all. If you think that's unsettling, wait until you hear what happened next. What would you do if someone you saw every single day, someone whose routine was as predictable as clockwork, suddenly vanished? Not just disappeared, but vanished, between one frame and the next. Would you trust your own eyes? Would you tell anyone? Or would you wonder if you were losing your mind? That's exactly what I've been asking myself for the past 3 days, and I need to tell someone. I need to know I'm not going crazy, so please, just listen. And maybe you can help me understand what's happening in my neighborhood. Because either reality is breaking down, or something is hunting us, one by one. My name is Marcus Chen, and I work the night shift at Secure Watch Solutions in Portland, Oregon. It's one of those jobs nobody really thinks about. I sit in a room with 27 monitors, watching security feeds from suburban neighborhoods, making sure nothing happens, logging incidents, calling the police when needed. 4 years I've been doing this. 4 years of watching empty streets, sleeping houses, the occasional raccoon knocking over trash cans. You learn the patterns. Mrs. Rodriguez walks her poodle at 5:15 a.m. sharp. The Peterson kids catch the school bus at 7:42, and Sarah Winters, she jogs past camera 12 every morning at 6:47 a.m., like clockwork. Sarah is, I don't know which tense to use anymore. She's a real estate agent, mid-30s, Always wears these bright neon running shoes you can spot from a mile away. Pink on Mondays, yellow on Tuesdays. You get the idea. I've never actually met her in person, but after watching someone's routine for 2 years, you feel like you know them. She has this thing she does, right by the Hendersons' house. There's a crack in the sidewalk. Been there since the city repaved in 2019. Sarah always does this little hop-skip move to avoid it. Every single day, same spot, same motion. It's almost musical, like she's dancing to a song only she can hear. Last Tuesday started like any other shift. Coffee number 3, fighting to stay awake, watching the sunrise creep across the monitors. The familiar burn in my eyes from staring at screens too long. My back aching from the cheap office chair corporate refuses to replace. I was filling out an incident report about a broken street light when movement on camera 12 caught my eye. There she was, right on schedule. 6:47 a.m. Tuesday meant yellow shoes. Those ridiculous neon yellow Nikes that looked like highlighters strapped to her feet. She was running her usual route, past the Hendersons' house with their ridiculous collection of lawn flamingos. 23 of them. I'd counted during a particularly boring shift. I watched her approach the crack, started to smile, waiting for the hop skip. It's the little things that keep you sane on night shift. These tiny human moments that remind you why you're watching. Protecting, even if they never know you exist. I glanced down at my report just for a second. Maybe 2. Had to correct a typo. Changed malfunctioning to malfunction. Such a small thing, such a tiny moment. When I looked back up, she was gone. Not gone like she'd run out of frame. Gone like someone had deleted her from existence. The timestamp still showed 6:47 a.m. Same frame, same Henderson's flamingos. Same crack in the sidewalk, but no Sarah. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, looked again. The street was empty. My first thought was that I dozed off. Microsleep. Happens sometimes on night shift. Your brain just checks out for a few seconds. But the timestamp hadn't changed. Still, 6:47 a.m. I rewound the footage. There she was again, running, approaching the crack, and then nothing. No transition, no blur. One frame she's there, the next she's not. I slowed it down, frame by frame, at exactly 6 hours, 47 minutes, and 23 seconds a.m. Sarah Winters vanished mid-stride. The coffee mug slipped from my hand, shattered on the floor. Hot liquid everywhere. I didn't care. I was watching the footage again. And again, and again. My hands were shaking as I checked the other cameras, all functioning normally. Camera 11 showed Mr. Patterson loading his truck for his morning deliveries. Camera 13 had the usual view of empty driveways and sleeping houses. Everything normal. Everything except camera 12. I called Ray, the tech guy, but he wouldn't be in until 9. Left a rambling voicemail about equipment malfunction. Possible software glitch. Need immediate diagnostic. Then I did what any reasonable person would do. I convinced myself I'd imagined it. Lack of sleep, too much caffeine, eyes playing tricks. The human brain isn't designed for night shift. It rebels. Makes you see things that aren't there. Or not see things that are, except I saved the footage, copied it to my personal drive, because something in my gut, something primal and ancient, told me this was important, that I'd need proof later. My hands moved on their own. Muscle memory from 4 years of saving incident footage, only this time, I was saving the impossible. I finished my shift in a daze, kept checking camera 12, waiting for Sarah to jog back into frame, laugh it off, make me feel stupid for worrying, but the street stayed empty, and when 7 o'clock rolled around, when the morning joggers should have been out in force, nobody came. Patterson didn't leave at his usual time. The Thompson twins, who always walked their matching golden retrievers at 7:15, stayed inside, like some unconscious part of the neighborhood knew, sensed. that something was wrong on Maple Street. I should have gone straight home, should have climbed into bed, pulled the covers over my head, pretended nothing happened. That's what a smart person would do. That's what a sane person would do. Instead, I drove to Maple Street, to Camera 12's location. The neighborhood looked different in person. Smaller somehow, more ordinary. The Hendersons' flamingos seemed cheaper in daylight, plastic and faded. Not the ominous sentinels they appeared to be on grainy security footage. I parked across from their house and waited. For what? I didn't know. Evidence? Answers? Sarah to come jogging by and prove I'd lost my mind. I kept checking my phone, the saved footage, watching Sarah vanish over and over, each time hoping to spot something new. Some clue, some explanation that would make this make sense. An hour passed, then 2, the neighborhood waking up around me. Cars pulling out of driveways, school buses making their rounds. Normal Tuesday morning things. Except nobody jogged down Maple Street. Nobody walked their dogs past the Hendersons' house, like animals avoiding a predator's territory. I was about to leave when I noticed something. A scorch mark on the sidewalk, right where Sarah had vanished. Not a big mark, maybe the size of a dinner plate, but the concrete was different, smooth, like it had been melted and reformed, like someone had taken a blowtorch to it, but from underneath. I got out to look closer, knelt down, touched it. The concrete was cold, colder than the surrounding sidewalk, cold that seemed to seep into my fingers, travel up my arm. A wrongness that made my teeth ache. That's when I met Dennis Ashford. You investigating too? I nearly jumped out of my skin. Dennis was standing behind me. This wiry guy in his 60s with wild gray hair and eyes that had seen too much. Wearing a Hawaiian shirt in Oregon in March. Carrying a notebook that looked like it had survived a war. Investigating? I tried to play dumb. He pointed at the scorch mark. Started 3 weeks ago. Random spots, always in the morning, always between 6:45 and 7 a.m. He squinted at me. You're the security guard, right? From Secure Watch, I've seen your car at the office. I nodded slowly. No point lying. Thought so. He pulled out his notebook, pages covered in times, dates, locations, cramped handwriting, diagrams, maps. I've been tracking them, the marks, 23 so far, all within a 6-block radius, all on jogging routes or walking paths. He showed me a hand-drawn map, red X's marking locations, dates written in tiny print. A pattern I couldn't quite grasp but felt intentional, deliberate. Has anyone else noticed? Dennis laughed, not a happy sound, more like a cough, like something was stuck in his throat. Notice, son, people have been disappearing for 3 weeks, but nobody wants to admit it. Mrs. Patterson from Oak Drive, gone. Husband says she left him, but her car's still there, clothes still in the closet. The Thompson twins from Elm Street vanished. Parents think they ran away. Together, at age 67. He shook his head. All during their morning routines. All between 6:45 and 7 a.m. The police think they're runaways. Midlife crises. Whatever helps them sleep at night. He flipped through his notebook. Showed me photos on his phone, scorch marks. Missing person flyers taped to telephone poles. Security footage with timestamps circled in red marker. But you saw something, didn't you? His eyes bored into mine. That's why you're here. At exactly the wrong time of day. Staring at exactly the wrong piece of sidewalk. I thought about the footage on my drive. About Sarah vanishing mid-stride. About how crazy this all sounded. About how I hadn't slept in 22 hours and maybe this was all some exhaustion-induced hallucination. Yeah, I whispered. I saw something. Dennis smiled. Not a comforting smile. The smile of someone who'd been waiting for validation. For proof they weren't insane. The smile of a drowning man who'd just found another person in the water. Then you need to see the rest. His apartment was a 5-minute walk. above the old Sunshine Bakery that had closed 3 years ago but still somehow smelled like fresh bread. Dennis unlocked 3 deadbolts, typed a code into an electronic lock, pushed open a door that looked reinforced. "Can't be too careful," he muttered. "Not anymore." The apartment was overwhelming. Every wall covered in maps, photographs, newspaper clippings. Red string connected pins on a massive corkboard. It looked like something from a conspiracy thriller, or a crime scene, or the last refuge of a brilliant mind trying to solve an impossible puzzle. Coffee? He didn't wait for an answer. Just poured 2 mugs of something that looked like motor oil and smelled worse. This started exactly 23 days ago. He pointed to a calendar. March 3rd circled in red. First disappearance, Maria Santos, jogger. Vanished on Pine Street at 6:52 a.m. No witnesses, no body, just gone. Left her dog behind. Little corgi named Muffin. Still had the leash in its mouth. Sat there for 3 hours waiting for her to come back. He pulled down a manila folder. Inside, dozens of printed screenshots. Security footage, traffic cameras, Ring doorbell videos, all time-stamped, all showing the same thing. Nothing. I've been collecting everything I can find. Every camera, every angle, every disappearance. Look at this. He spread out the images. Different angles, different days, but always the same pattern. A person moving through frame, a flicker, then empty space. At first I thought it was editing, deep fakes, some sick joke, but then I found this. He pulled out another folder, this one marked Shadows. Watch the shadows. Dennis pointed to one image. See, the shadow stays for a split second after the person vanishes. Like, whatever takes them doesn't quite get everything on the first pass. My blood ran cold. He was right. In frame after frame, a shadow lingered. Human-shaped, frozen mid-motion. Then it too would disappear. But for just a moment, the shadow existed without its owner. "What do you think it is?" My voice came out shakier than intended. Dennis walked to another wall. This one covered in stranger things. Ancient symbols. Newspaper articles about electromagnetic anomalies. Photos of crop circles and unexplained phenomena. Government documents with thick black redactions. 3 theories. He held up fingers. 1. Government experiment. Some kind of targeted elimination system. Silent, traceless, perfect for making problems disappear. We've got 3 military contractors in the area. Raytheon, Darkwater, Tekdyne. Any one of them could be testing something. He sipped his coffee, made a face, added more sugar. 2. Dimensional rift. Maybe something went wrong at that tech company over in Hillsborough. Quantum computing, particle acceleration, playing with forces we don't understand. Opened a door that should have stayed closed. Now things are leaking through. And 3? Dennis looked me straight in the eye. His hand trembled slightly, coffee sloshing. Predators. Not from here. Using the dawn hours when electromagnetic fields are weakest. When the barrier between places is thinnest. Hunting. Taking people when they're isolated, vulnerable. Following patterns. Learning routines. Like wolves studying a herd. Looking for the weak, the predictable, the alone. The room suddenly felt very small, very cold, despite the March sun streaming through grimy windows. But here's what really scares me. Dennis pulled out another folder. This one marked with today's date. Fresh, the ink still looked wet. The intervals are shortening. First week, 1 person every 3 days. Second week, every 2 days. This week. He opened the folder. 7 missing person reports. 7 scorch marks photographed with timestamps. 7 families wondering where their loved ones had gone. Every day, sometimes twice, whatever this is, it's accelerating, getting stronger, or hungrier, or both. I thought about Sarah, about her yellow shoes, about how I'd watched her run that same route 5 days a week for 2 years. Always the same time, always the same path, always that little hop skip over the crack. Predictable, routine, exactly what a predator would look for. We need to warn people. Dennis laughed again, that bitter sound, like glass breaking. I've tried. Called the police 17 times, the FBI twice. Local news won't touch it. They think I'm just another crazy old man. Without proof, without something they can't explain away, nobody listens. Nobody wants to listen. It's easier to believe people just leave. Just walk away from their lives. Happens all the time, right? I reached into my jacket, pulled out the USB drive. Such a small thing, weighing maybe an ounce, but it felt heavier than it should. I have proof, HD footage, Sarah Winters, this morning. 6:47 a.m., full resolution, multiple angles, metadata intact. Dennis's eyes widened. His coffee mug stopped halfway to his lips. Show me. We watched the footage 17 times, slowing it down, enhancing it. Frame by frame analysis. Dennis had software I didn't recognize. Military grade, the kind of thing you're not supposed to have. Each viewing revealed something new, something worse. On the 18th viewing, Dennis spotted it. There. He paused the video. Look at the window, the Hendersons' living room. I leaned closer. The monitor's blue light harsh in the dim apartment. In the reflection, barely visible, was something that shouldn't have been there. A shimmer. Like heat distortion. But wrong. Moving against the wind. Growing larger as it approached Sarah. Jesus, I breathed. That's not all. Watch her shadow. He advanced frame by frame. Sarah's shadow wasn't behaving normally. It was stretching. Reaching toward something we couldn't see, like it was being pulled. Drawn. In the final frame before she vanished. Her shadow was pointing completely the wrong direction. Toward the shimmer. Toward whatever was hiding in the space between spaces. It's hunting by shadows, Dennis whispered. That's why it happens at dawn. When shadows are longest, most distorted. When the connection between us and our shadows is stretched, vulnerable, easier to manipulate. My phone buzzed. A text from Ray at work. Dude, where are you? Cops are here. Something happened to Patterson. The overnight security guard, they found his car, but... My hands went numb. I showed Dennis the text. His face went pale, paler than it already was. Patterson works the shift after you, doesn't he? Gets off at 7 a.m.? I nodded, unable to speak. When does he usually leave the office? My heart sank. Between 6:45 and... We both said it together, 7 a.m. Dennis was already moving, grabbing equipment I didn't recognize. Cameras with strange lenses. Some kind of electromagnetic field detector that looked homemade. A bag of what looked like iron filings. Salt. Mirror fragments. Things that belonged in a different kind of story. If this thing is escalating, if it's learning our patterns... He stuffed gear into a military surplus backpack. Then tomorrow morning, everyone who follows a routine between 6:45 and 7 is a target. Dog walkers, joggers, people getting newspapers, shift workers heading home. We have to do something. Dennis paused at the door, turned back. His eyes looked ancient, tired, but determined. There's only one way to understand a predator. He looked back at me. You offer it prey. The plan was insane, but the alternative was watching more people vanish, letting this thing, whatever it was, feed unopposed. So, at 6:15 a.m. the next morning, I was standing on Maple Street, right where Sarah had disappeared, wearing running clothes I'd bought at an all-night Walmart, trying to look like just another jogger, just another predictable pattern, just another shadow waiting to be pulled. Dennis was positioned across the street with his equipment, cameras at multiple angles, EMF detector ready, iron filings scattered in careful patterns on the sidewalk. Symbols I didn't recognize but felt ancient. If something was hunting, we'd document it, understand it, maybe find a way to stop it. 6:30 a.m. The street was empty, too empty. Even the birds were quiet. No dogs barking, no cars starting. Like the whole neighborhood was holding its breath. 6:40 a.m. My hands were shaking, not from cold, from the weight of what we were trying to do, from the insanity of it, from the knowledge that I might be about to join Sarah, wherever she was. 6:45 a.m. Dennis gave me a thumbs up. Recording, all systems active. Whatever happened next, we'd have proof. I started jogging, slow, steady, following Sarah's exact route, past the Hendersons' house. The flamingos seemed to watch me, track my movement, over the crack in the sidewalk. And yes, I did the hop skip, don't ask me why. It just felt necessary, like breaking the pattern might alert it too soon. My shadow stretched out behind me, long and dark in the dawn light, normal, natural, but I could feel it, the wrongness, the attention. Something watching, waiting, hungry. 6:46 a.m., the air felt different, thicker, like breathing soup. Like the atmosphere was becoming something else, something hostile to human life. 6:47 a.m., I reached the spot, the scorch mark, Sarah's last location. And I felt it. Have you ever been in a room and known someone was watching you? That crawling sensation on your neck, the primitive part of your brain screaming danger? Multiply that by 1,000. Something was there, close, circling, studying, deciding. The iron filings started moving, not blown by wind, pulled, toward something we couldn't see, forming patterns, symbols, messages in a language that predated words. Dennis was shouting, pointing at his equipment. The readings were off the charts. Electromagnetic fields spiking, reality bending. That's when I saw my shadow. It wasn't copying my movements anymore. It was reaching, stretching, being pulled toward something behind me. I turned, and I saw it, not clearly. Human eyes aren't meant to process what I was looking at. It was like trying to focus on something that existed between the spaces we can see, in the gaps between photons, in the pause between heartbeats, tall, impossibly thin, made of angles that hurt to perceive, geometries that shouldn't exist in 3 dimensions, and hungry. God, the hunger that radiated from it. Not just for food, for existence, for the very essence of what makes us real. It reached for me, not with hands, with something worse, something that existed in the spaces between light and shadow, between being and not being. I felt my shadow being pulled, torn, like someone trying to peel my soul out through my feet, cold beyond description, pain beyond comprehension. Then Dennis did something I'll never forget. He turned on every light he'd brought. Construction floods, LED strips, high-powered flashlights, even road flares. All at once, the street lit up like midday, like the surface of the sun, shadows vanishing in the overwhelming brightness. The thing screamed, not with sound, with absence, like reality itself was crying out. For a split second, in that blazing light, I saw it clearly, and I wish I hadn't. It wasn't one creature, it was dozens, maybe hundreds, twisted together. Human shadows worn like clothing, layered, sewn together with darkness. Faces I recognized from missing posters stretched and distorted over its impossible form. And Sarah. I saw Sarah's shadow, still running, still doing that hop skip, still aware. Her shadow face stretched in an eternal scream. Trapped. Part of it now. Forever. Then it was gone. Not vanished, retreated. Back to whatever space between spaces it came from, leaving only a new scorch mark, larger than the others, and the smell of ozone and terror and something else. Something organic, like meat left in the sun too long. Dennis helped me back to his apartment. My legs wouldn't work right, like my shadow had been partially torn away and taken some of my substance with it. We didn't speak for an hour, just sat, shaking, processing, trying to fit what we'd seen into minds not designed for such things. Finally, he pulled out a map, started marking new patterns, the scorch marks, the disappearances, the electromagnetic readings. His hands were steady now, purpose overcoming fear. It's not random. He traced lines between points. Look, it's creating a perimeter, marking territory. Each person it takes, their shadow becomes part of it, makes it stronger, lets it reach further. It's building itself, growing. So, what do? Dennis looked older, tired, but also excited. The look of a man who'd found his purpose, his reason for being. It feeds between 6:45 and 7 a.m. because that's when the barrier is thinnest, when shadows are long but light is still weak. But now it knows we know. It'll adapt, change tactics, maybe change times. He was right. The next morning, 3 people vanished, but not at dawn. At 6:45 p.m., dusk, when shadows stretched the other direction. The Hendersons' neighbors, gone between their front door and their car, 20 feet, 4 seconds, gone. That was 3 days ago. The disappearances have accelerated. Different times now, no pattern we can predict. Dawn, dusk, even broad daylight if the shadows are right. If the angle is correct, if the hunger is strong enough. The police have noticed but can't explain it. The FBI is asking questions. Men in black suits who don't give names, who confiscate security footage, who tell people to stop talking, but people keep vanishing. And the thing, it's getting bolder, stronger, taking more, building itself into something worse. Dennis thinks it's building toward something, that once it has enough shadows, enough stolen lives, it won't need to hunt from the spaces between. It'll be able to exist here, fully, permanently, a thing of stolen shadows and consumed lives, wearing our missing like a coat. I haven't slept since I saw it. Can't. Every time I close my eyes, I see Sarah's shadow, still running, still trapped, still aware, and I know that if we don't find a way to stop this thing, we'll all be joining her, one by one, shadow by shadow, until there's nothing left but it, wearing us, being us, but wrong. Dennis has a plan, says he's been researching, old books, ancient texts, things that talk about shadow eaters, light thieves, the hungry ones who live between. Says there might be a way, a ritual, a weapon, something. But here's what terrifies me most. Remember that security footage I saved? The proof of Sarah vanishing? I went to check it yesterday, to show someone else, to finally get help. It's changing, not deleted, changing. Each time I watch it, Sarah's face is less clear, her features blurring, like she's being erased, not just from the world, from memory, from reality itself. And I checked the employee records at her real estate office. She's not there. Never was. Her desk belongs to someone named David Martinez. Always has. Her apartment is empty. Has been for months according to the landlord. No missing person report. No family asking questions. When I asked about Sarah Winters, people looked confused. Like the name almost meant something. Almost triggered a memory. But didn't quite. Even Dennis's files. The photos, the evidence, fading, aging decades and days. Like the thing isn't just taking people, it's erasing them. From reality, from memory, from existence itself. Unmaking them, unwriting their stories. How long before I start forgetting? How long before Dennis vanishes and I don't even remember meeting him? How long before the empty spaces where people used to be seem normal, natural? How long before we accept the gaps in our world as if they were always there? I'm uploading this while I still remember, while Sarah Winters still exists in my mind, while the truth still has shape. Dennis says we're going to try something tomorrow. Something dangerous. Something that might stop it or might feed us to it. But we have to try, because the alternative is letting it hollow out our world one shadow at a time. If you're reading this, check your local news. Count the missing person reports. Notice the patterns. The morning joggers who don't jog anymore. The dog walkers who left their dogs behind. The familiar faces that aren't familiar anymore because they're gone and you can't quite remember them. And tell me, honestly, do you remember Sarah Winters? 35, real estate agent, bright running shoes, did a little hop skip over the crack in the sidewalk every morning at 6:47 a.m. Do you remember her? Because I'm starting to forget her face, the sound of her footsteps on the security feed, the way her ponytail bounced when she ran. And if you can't remember someone, if nobody can, did they ever really exist at all? Wait, do you hear that? Outside your window. That sound like breathing, but not quite. Like air being pulled through spaces too small. Look at your shadow, right now. Is it pointing the right direction? Is it copying your movements? When did you last check the time? And tell me, when did you last see your neighbors? The ones who used to walk their dog every morning. The ones whose car hasn't moved in days. The ones whose mail is piling up. When did you last really see them? Or are you already forgetting, already accepting the absence? If you're watching this between 6:45 and 7 o'clock, morning or evening, check your shadow, trust me. Check it right now. And if it's not copying your movements exactly, if it seems to be reaching for something you can't see, run. Don't think. Don't look back. Just run. Get to the light, any light, all the light you can find. Because once it marks you, once it knows your routine, once it tastes your shadow, you're already gone. You just don't know it yet. Please, share this. Tell others. Maybe if enough people know, if enough people watch, if enough people remember, we can stop it, or at least, when we vanish, someone will remember. Someone will know we existed. Someone will keep our shadows from being worn by that thing. Someone has to remember, before we're all just shadows, running forever, aware but trapped, screaming without sound, in the spaces between, in the gaps in reality, in the hunting ground of something that should not be. The space where it lives, where it feeds, where it's waiting. For you. Story number 3. The coffee mug in my hand has gone cold. I've been staring at it for I don't know how long. There's a chip on the rim, right where Sarah's lipstick used to leave those perfect pink marks. Funny how something so small can unravel your entire world. I know what you're thinking. People disappear all the time. They move away, they ghost you, they die. But this isn't like that. This is different. Because when Sarah disappeared, she didn't just leave. She was erased, completely, like she never existed at all. And I'm the only one who remembers her. Before you click away, before you dismiss this as another internet story, I need you to understand something. I'm not crazy, I've checked. 3 therapists, 2 psychiatrists, and more medical tests than I can count. My brain is fine, my memories are real. Sarah was real. But try explaining that to anyone in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, and they look at you like you've grown a second head. It started on a Tuesday, October 15th. I remember because Sarah and I had plans to go to the Autumn Harvest Festival at New Bow Market. We'd been going together for 6 years straight, ever since we met in college at the University of Iowa. I woke up to silence. No text from Sarah. Which was weird because she always sent me a good morning meme. Something stupid from TikTok or a screenshot of a tweet about the coffee addiction. My phone felt wrong without that notification. I texted her, "Hey, sleepyhead, you alive? Festival starts at 10. The message turned green. Green, not blue, like her number didn't exist anymore. I figured her phone died. Classic Sarah. She'd probably forgotten to charge it again while binge-watching that new Netflix series about the haunted hotel. So, I threw on my favorite flannel, the one she bought me last Christmas, and drove to her apartment on 3rd Avenue. The building looked the same. Red brick, 5 stories. That weird gargoyle on the corner that Sarah named Gerald. But when I buzzed apartment 3B, nothing. I tried again, still nothing. The door opened. Mrs. Chen from 3A shuffled out with her grocery cart. "Morning, Mrs. Chen," I said. "Is Sarah home? She's not answering." Mrs. Chen squinted at me through her thick glasses. "Sarah? Who's Sarah?" My stomach did this weird flip. "Sarah Martinez, 3B, your neighbor." She shook her head slowly. "Nobody lives in 3B, honey. Been empty for months." I laughed. It came out wrong. Too high, too sharp. That's not possible. I was here last week. We watched movies and ate too much Chinese food from Dragon Palace." Mrs. Chen's expression shifted from confusion to concern. "Are you feeling all right? Maybe you have the wrong building?" But I didn't have the wrong building. I knew this place. I'd helped Sarah move in. Carried boxes up 3 flights of stairs because the elevator was broken. Assembled that ridiculous IKEA bookshelf that took us 4 hours and half a bottle of wine. I pushed past Mrs. Chen, not roughly but urgently, and climbed the stairs. My legs felt heavy, like walking through water. The hallway smelled the same, that weird mix of old carpet and whatever Mr. Rodriguez in 3C was always cooking. I stood in front of 3B. The door was there. Same scratched brass numbers. Same peeling paint near the bottom where Sarah's bike had dinged it. But something was different. No welcome mat. Sarah had this ridiculous mat with a cat on it that said, "Come back with a warrant." It was gone. I knocked. The sound echoed hollow. Empty. "Sarah?" My voice cracked. "Sarah, this isn't funny. Nothing. I tried the handle. Locked." Of course it was locked, but I had a key. Sarah gave me one after the incident with the smoke alarm and the burnt quesadilla. I fumbled for my key ring. Found the silver key with the smiley face sticker. It didn't fit. Not like it was the wrong key. The lock was different. Completely different. A Yale instead of the schlag I remembered. My hands were shaking now. I pressed my ear against the door. Silence. Not the kind of silence when someone's home, but quiet. The kind of silence that feels abandoned. "Can I help you?" I spun around. A man stood in the hallway, tall, thin, wearing a maintenance uniform. "I'm looking for my friend," I said. "Sarah Martinez. She lives here, in 3B. He frowned. 3B's been vacant since May. We're actually showing it tomorrow if you're interested. May, 5 months. But I'd been here last week, hadn't I? That's impossible, I whispered. The maintenance man's frown deepened. Look, I don't know what you're trying to pull, but I ran. Just turned and ran. Down the stairs, past Mrs. Chen, still struggling with her cart. Out into the October morning that suddenly felt too bright, too normal, too real. My car was where I'd left it. Everything was where I'd left it. Everything except Sarah. I drove to Dragon Palace. Maybe she was there. We practically lived at that place. The owner, Jimmy, always gave us extra fortune cookies because Sarah made him laugh. The bell chimed as I pushed through the door. Same red booths, same fish tank with the one goldfish Sarah named Beyoncé. Same smell of sesame oil and soy sauce. Jimmy looked up from the register. "Hey, long time no see. Table for one?" "Where's Sarah?" The words tumbled out. "She hasn't been in. We were just here last week. She ordered the Kung Pao chicken with extra peanuts. You laughed at her joke about the delivery driver." Jimmy's smile faltered. I don't know any Sarah. And you haven't been here in months. Not since..." He paused, thinking. "Not since probably June? You came in alone. Ordered takeout." "June. Alone. No, that wasn't right. Sarah and I came here all the time. Every Friday, sometimes Tuesdays too if we'd had a rough day. She always stole my egg rolls. Always. It was our thing." "The joke," I insisted. "About the delivery driver and the GPS?" You laughed so hard you snorted. Remember? Jimmy shook his head slowly, carefully, like he was dealing with someone dangerous. I think you might be confused. Maybe you're thinking of a different restaurant. But I wasn't confused. I remembered the booth in the corner. The way Sarah always sat facing the door because she liked to people watch. How she'd rate people's first date potential on a scale of 1 to 10. How my phone buzzed. Unknown number. Stop looking for me. 3 words. That's all. But I knew it was her. The syntax, the period at the end. Sarah always used proper punctuation in texts. Said it was her one grammatical hill to die on. I showed Jimmy the message. See, she just texted me. She's real. Jimmy squinted at my phone. His face went pale. There's nothing there. What? I looked at the screen. The message was gone. Just my last text to Sarah sitting there. Delivered, never read. I must have looked insane. Standing there in Dragon Palace, shaking, staring at my phone like it had betrayed me. Maybe it had. I think you should go, Jimmy said quietly. I don't want any trouble. I left. What else could I do? But as I reached the door, I turned back. The goldfish, I said. Why did you name it Beyoncé? Jimmy's face grunched in confusion. I didn't. That's a weird name for a fish. But he had. Sarah had convinced him. Said the fish had star quality. They'd laughed about it for 10 minutes, hadn't they? I drove home on autopilot. My apartment felt wrong. Too quiet, too empty, but also too full. Like the space where Sarah should be had weight. Presence. I needed proof. Evidence, something concrete that I wasn't losing my mind. Photos. We had hundreds of photos together, thousands probably. 6 years of friendship documented in ridiculous selfies and candid moments. I grabbed my phone, opened the gallery, scrolled to last week. There I was, at the coffee shop on First Avenue, sitting alone. But I remembered Sarah being there. She'd been across from me working on her laptop, complaining about her boss at the marketing firm. We'd shared a blueberry muffin. In the photo, there was 1 coffee cup, 1 laptop, 1 chair pulled out, but the angle was wrong. Like I'd been trying to include someone else in the frame, someone who wasn't there. I scrolled back further. Our trip to Chicago in August. The Art Institute, the Bean, Navy Pier. In every photo I was alone, but I remembered her being there. I could still hear her laugh when the seagull stole her hot dog. Still feel her grab my arm when we got lost in Millennium Park. My laptop. Maybe the photos were backed up differently there. I pulled it out, hands shaking so bad I could barely type my password. Facebook. We were friends on Facebook. Had been since freshman year. I searched. Sarah Martinez. Results, 847 people. None of them her. None of them with her face, her smile, that tiny scar above her left eyebrow from when she fell off her bike in 3rd grade. Instagram, same thing. Twitter, LinkedIn. Nothing. It was like she'd been digitally erased. But that was impossible. You can't just delete someone from the internet. There are always traces, cache files, screenshots, something. My best friend for 6 years, and the only proof I had that she ever existed was the indent on my couch where she always sat. The empty space in my life where she used to be. I called her number again. This time, I got a recording. The number you have dialed is not in service. Her parents. Her parents lived in Des Moines, Rosa and Miguel Martinez. They'd had me over for Thanksgiving last year. Rosa made the best tamales I'd ever tasted. Directory assistants had no listing for them. I drove to the university. Maybe her records were there. She'd graduated with a degree in communications. Same year as me. We'd walked together, made fun of our stupid hats, gotten drunk on champagne at the after-party. But, she continued, and that word gave me hope, I do have something odd. Several sessions where you canceled last minute. The reasons are blank. That's not like me. I always note cancellation reasons for billing. She showed me the file. 3 cancellations. No reasons listed. But I remembered. Sarah's birthday, her graduation party, the day her dad had his heart attack, and I'd driven her to Des Moines. "There's something else," Dr. Webb said. She looked uncomfortable. "Yesterday, I had another patient come in. Similar story. Someone they loved had vanished. Everyone had forgotten them. I thought they were having a psychotic break, but what? The details were too specific, too consistent, and they had proof. A voicemail that shouldn't exist from someone who never did." My hands were shaking again. Who was it? Who did they lose? I can't tell you that, patient confidentiality, but Kyle, I've been in practice for 20 years. Yesterday was the 3rd time this month someone's come to me with this exact scenario. 3 times. 3 people erased. At least. "What do I do?" I whispered. Dr. Webb closed the file. "I don't know, but if this is real, if people are being erased, then documenting everything might be the only way to fight back. Write it down, record it, create evidence they can't delete." I left her office with more questions than answers, but at least I wasn't alone. Others were experiencing this. Others remembered their vanished loved ones. On the drive home, I stopped at Target. Bought notebooks, pens, a voice recorder, a Polaroid camera. If digital evidence could be erased, maybe analog couldn't. The first Polaroid I took was of Sarah's spot on my couch. The indent was still there. Barely visible, but there. Proof that someone had existed in that space. Frequently. Recently. I labeled it, "Where Sarah Sat." October 16th. She existed. The photo developed slowly, but when it finished, the couch looked different. Newer. The indent was gone. Like it had never been there at all. Whatever was erasing Sarah, it was getting stronger. More thorough. How long before it erased me too? That night, I couldn't go home. The apartment felt like a trap, like something was waiting there. Watching. So I drove. No destination. Just movement. I ended up at Palisades State Park. Sarah and I used to hike there, the Overlook Trail. She was terrified of heights, but did it anyway because she said facing your fears was how you knew you were alive. The park was closed, but I parked at the entrance and walked. The moon was full, bright enough to see the path, bright enough to see I was alone. My phone had been silent for hours. No more messages. That worried me more than the threats. The overlook was exactly as I remembered. Wooden railing, bench where we'd sit and watch the sunrise, view of the Cedar River winding below. I sat on the bench and tried to think, what connected the vanished people? Why could some of us remember when others couldn't? What was the pattern? You're very persistent. I didn't jump, didn't scream. Some part of me had been expecting this. A woman stood at the edge of the overlook. Middle-aged, ordinary. The kind of person you'd pass in a grocery store and never notice, except for her eyes. Her eyes were wrong, too old, too knowing. "Where's Sarah?" My voice was steadier than I felt. "Gone," the woman said simply, like she never was, because she never was. "That's not true. I remember. Memory is just electrical impulses, chemistry, easily altered, easily removed." She turned to face me fully. "But you're different. Some of you always are. The ones who hold on too tight, love too deep. You leave marks we can't quite erase." "We?" She smiled. It wasn't cruel, just tired. "We've always been here, cleaning up, maintaining the narrative. Do you have any idea how messy reality would be if we let everyone who ever existed stay in the story?" My mind reeled. "You're saying you just delete people?" "Not delete, redistribute their energy, their impact, their role in the world. It gets absorbed by others. Spread out, like taking a drop of ink out of water. The water's still there, just a little less colorful." "Why Sarah?" The question came out broken. "Why her?" The woman sighed. "Random selection. Population management. Sometimes people just slip through the cracks of reality, and we smooth those cracks over. It's nothing personal. Nothing personal. 6 years of friendship, of memories, of love, nothing personal. I'm going to forget her, I said. It wasn't a question. Eventually, the human mind isn't meant to hold on to paradoxes. You'll wake up one morning and the confusion will be gone. The pain will be gone. You'll have a normal life, a life that makes sense. All those empty spaces will fill themselves in with new explanations, new people, new memories. I don't want to forget. No one ever does, but you will. They always do, except... She paused, studied me, those ancient eyes calculating. Except, sometimes, very rarely, someone refuses. They hold on so tight that removing the memory would unravel too much, cause more problems than it solves. Sometimes we let them remember, as a kindness or a cruelty, I'm never sure which. Let me remember, please. I hated begging, but I'd do it for Sarah. I'll never tell anyone. I'll stop looking. Just let me remember her. The woman walked closer, sat beside me on the bench. Up close, she smelled like nothing, like the absence of scent. The memory will hurt, every day, forever, knowing she existed but being unable to prove it, unable to share your grief, unable to even visit her grave because she never died. She just never was. Are you sure that's what you want? I thought about Sarah, her laugh, her terrible taste in movies, the way she always believed in me even when I didn't believe in myself, the way she made the world brighter just by being in it. Yes, I said, I'm sure. The woman nodded. Then remember, Kyle Torres. Remember, Sarah Isabel Martinez. Remember and suffer. And know that your suffering is the only proof she ever existed at all. She stood, started to walk away, then paused. One more thing. The others who remember, the ones like you, you'll find each other eventually. The grief recognizes itself. When you do, don't try to fight us. We're not cruel, we're necessary, like death, like forgetting. Just quieter. Wait, I called out. Who are you? What are you? But she was gone, not walked away, gone, like Sarah. Like she'd never been there at all. I sat on that bench until sunrise, watched the light creep across the river, felt the weight of memory settling into my bones. A lifetime of remembering someone who never existed. When I finally went home, my apartment looked different. Smaller. The indent on the couch was gone. The photos on my phone showed only me. Even the post-it notes I'd written had faded, the ink disappearing like it had been written in water. But I remembered every detail, every moment, every word she'd ever said. The woman was right. It hurt. God, it hurt. Like carrying a wound that would never heal. A ghost that only I could see, but it was worth it. Because somewhere in the space between memory and reality, Sarah existed. She existed because I remembered her. She mattered because I refused to let her not matter. I've met others since then, the ones who remember. We recognize each other by the look in our eyes, the weight we carry. We don't talk about it. Can't. But sometimes, late at night, we share stories. Not names, never names, but stories about the people we lost, the people who never were. And in those moments, our ghosts become real again. Just for a little while. I still have that coffee mug, the one with the chip on the rim. I drink from it every morning. And every morning, I remember Sarah Martinez, my best friend. The girl who never existed. The girl I'll never forget. Sometimes I get messages, unknown numbers. Always the same, let her go. But I won't, I can't. Because if I forget Sarah, then she really will be gone. And I promised her once, during one of those late-night conversations, that I'd never let her disappear. I keep that promise. even if keeping it means living with a truth no one else believes, even if it means being the only person in the world who mourns someone who never was. So, if you're watching this, if you've lost someone everyone else has forgotten, you're not crazy, you're not alone, they existed, they mattered, and as long as you remember them, they always will. Hold on to that, no matter how much it hurts, no matter how crazy the world tells you you are. Hold on, because sometimes remembering is the greatest act of love we have left. And sometimes, just sometimes, love is stronger than whatever's trying to make us forget. Sweet dreams. Story number 4. What if I told you that some staircases don't just lead up or down? They lead sideways into places that were never meant to exist. You'd probably laugh, call me crazy, maybe even click away right now. But before you do, let me ask you this. Have you ever walked up a familiar staircase in your own home and suddenly felt like you were somewhere else entirely? Like the walls were watching you? Like each step was taking you further from safety than you'd ever been before? My name is Sarah Chen, and I'm a real estate photographer here in Portland, Oregon. I've been inside hundreds of homes, captured thousands of rooms through my lens. I thought I'd seen everything, until I found the staircase on Maple Street that changed everything I believed about the world we live in. This isn't some ghost story your grandmother told you around a campfire. This isn't fiction. This happened to me 3 weeks ago, and I'm still trying to make sense of it all. The house is still there. The staircase is still there, and if you're brave enough, you could probably find it too. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you exactly how this started, because the beginning matters. It always matters. It was a Tuesday morning in late October when my phone buzzed with a text from my agent, Marcus Rodriguez. I was sitting in my usual spot at Powell's Coffee, editing photos from a Victorian mansion shoot in the Pearl District, when his message popped up. Emergency job. Need photos today. 1247 Maple Street. Seller's desperate. Double rate if you can get there by noon. Double rate. That was unusual. Marcus typically haggled over every dollar, especially for standard residential shoots. I glanced at my watch. 10:47 a.m. Maple Street was only 15 minutes away in the Hawthorne neighborhood. What's the rush? I typed back. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Finally, seller's moving out of state tomorrow. Needs listing, live by evening. House has been difficult to photograph. Difficult to photograph. In my 5 years doing this work, I'd learned that phrase could mean anything from hoarder situations to homes with such bad lighting that even my professional equipment struggled. But for double rate, I could handle whatever challenges awaited. I packed my gear, my Canon 5D Mark IV, the wide-angle lens that made cramped rooms look spacious, my portable LED panels, and the tripod that had survived more moves than I cared to count. The routine was comforting, familiar. I had no idea I was packing equipment that would document something impossible. The drive to Maple Street took me through the heart of Southeast Portland, past the coffee shops and vintage stores that made this area feel like home. October in Oregon meant the maple trees were turning brilliant shades of red and gold, their leaves creating a canopy that filtered the pale autumn sunlight into something almost magical. It should have been beautiful. It was beautiful, until I reached 1247. The house stood out immediately, and not in a good way. While every other home on the tree-lined street seemed to glow in the fall light, this one appeared to absorb it. The 2-story craftsman-style home wasn't particularly old, probably built in the 1920s, but something about it felt ancient. The blue-gray paint was peeling in places, and the front porch sagged slightly, as if the house itself was tired. I parked my Honda CR-V in the driveway and gathered my equipment. The silence struck me first. No birds singing in the maple tree that shaded the front yard. No distant hum of traffic from Hawthorne Boulevard just 3 blocks away. Even the wind seemed to have stopped moving through the leaves. The lockbox hung from the front door handle, and Marcus had texted me the combination, 4729. My fingers felt clumsy as I turned the dials, though I couldn't understand why. I'd opened hundreds of these lockboxes. This should have been automatic. The key turned easily in the lock, and the front door swung open with a soft creak that seemed to echo longer than it should have. The interior hit me like a wave. Not smell, though there was a faint mustiness, like old books left too long in a damp basement. Not sight. The rooms were empty, staged with the kind of generic furniture rental companies provided. It was the feeling, the sense that I'd stepped into somewhere I didn't belong. I shook my head, tried to focus on the job. First impressions of houses could be deceiving, especially empty ones. They always felt different without the life that families brought to them. The living room was standard, hardwood floors that needed refinishing, a brick fireplace that dominated one wall, built-in bookshelves that were empty except for a few decorative objects that looked like they'd been placed there moments before. I set up my tripod, adjusted my camera settings, and began shooting. But as I worked, I became aware of something odd. The house felt bigger on the inside than it had appeared from the street. Not dramatically so, just enough to be unsettling. Like when you're walking through an airport and suddenly realize you've been walking much longer than the distance should have required. I photographed the living room, the dining room, the kitchen with its white cabinets and black granite countertops that screamed recent renovation. Everything appeared normal through my viewfinder. It was only when I lowered the camera that the feeling returned. That sense of displacement, of being somewhere other than where I should be. The first floor took me about 40 minutes to shoot. Standard timing for a house this size. But when I reached the base of the staircase to head to the second floor, I paused. The staircase was wrong. I know that sounds dramatic, but I can't think of a better way to describe it. It was a typical wooden staircase, painted white with a dark handrail. 13 steps to the landing, then a turn to the right for the final 4 steps to the second floor. Nothing unusual about the construction or the materials. But looking up those stairs, I felt the same sensation I'd experienced once as a child when I'd gotten lost in the corn maze at Sauvie Island. That moment when you realize you're not just lost, you're lost in a way that doesn't make sense. When the path you came from seems to have vanished and every direction looks the same. I gripped my camera tighter and started climbing. The first step felt normal. The wood was solid beneath my feet, and the handrail was smooth under my palm. But by the third step, something had changed. The air felt thicker, almost viscous, like I was climbing underwater. My breathing became more deliberate, each inhale requiring effort. By the 7th step, I noticed the walls. They were still the same cream-colored paint, still adorned with the same generic landscape prints that the staging company had hung throughout the house, but they seemed to be stretching. Not moving exactly, but expanding. Like the distance between the pictures was growing as I climbed. I stopped on the 10th step and looked back down. The bottom of the staircase appeared normal. The living room beyond looked exactly as I'd left it. But when I turned to continue climbing, the top of the stairs seemed farther away than it had been moments before. "Get it together, Sarah," I whispered to myself. "You're being ridiculous." But my voice sounded different in the stairwell. Smaller, like the space was too big to contain it properly. I reached the landing and turned right to climb the final 4 steps. That's when I saw the door. It shouldn't have been there. The house was a standard 2-story craftsman. From the outside, I could see exactly where the second floor ended. There was no space for additional rooms beyond what the floor plan showed. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, and a hallway connecting them. But there it was, a door at the end of a hallway that extended past where the house should have ended. The door was painted the same white as all the others in the house. It had the same brushed nickel handle, the same simple design. But something about it made my skin crawl. I checked my watch, 12:23 p.m. I'd been in the house for just over half an hour, and I still needed to photograph the second floor. but I couldn't stop staring at that door. It was definitely closed, but I could swear I heard something coming from behind it. Not voices, not footsteps. Something else. Something that sounded almost like breathing. I stood at the top of the staircase for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, staring at that impossible door. Every rational part of my mind insisted it couldn't exist. I'd walked around the entire exterior of the house before entering. I'd seen the roof line, the windows, the dimensions. There was no space for a hallway extending in that direction, but there it was. My photography instincts kicked in before my common sense could stop me. I raised my camera and took a shot of the hallway. Through the viewfinder, everything looked normal, almost boring. Just a white-walled corridor with generic carpet and that mysterious door at the end. I lowered the camera and blinked. The hallway seemed longer than it had appeared through the lens. "You're losing it," I muttered, but I started walking toward the door anyway. Each step down that hallway felt like walking through thick honey. Not physically. My legs moved normally. My feet made the expected soft sounds on the carpet. But time itself seemed to be stretching, each second taking longer to pass than it should. The breathing sound grew louder as I approached the door. Not human breathing. Too slow, too deep. Like something large was sleeping just on the other side of the thin wood. I reached for the handle, then stopped. My hand was shaking, and I couldn't understand why. I'd been in hundreds of empty houses. I'd photographed estate sales where the owners had passed away in the bedrooms I was shooting. I wasn't easily spooked. But something about this door felt final. Like opening it would change everything, and I wouldn't be able to change it back. I thought about leaving, just turning around, walking back down that impossible staircase, packing up my equipment and telling Marcus the job was done. I could edit the photos I'd already taken and submit them. The house would sell, or it wouldn't. Not my problem. But then I heard my father's voice in my head. Dad had been a contractor before he retired, and he'd always taught me to finish what I started. "Half a job is no job at all, Sarah girl," he used to say when I'd complain about homework or chores. I turned the handle. The door opened into a room that couldn't exist. It was enormous. Much larger than any room should have been in a house this size. The ceiling stretched up into darkness that my camera flash couldn't penetrate. The walls were covered in the same cream paint as the rest of the house, but they seemed to go on forever, fading into shadow at the edges of my vision. But it was the furniture that made my blood run cold. The room was furnished with pieces I recognized. The couch from my apartment in college. The dining table from my childhood home in Salem. My grandmother's rocking chair. The one that had been sold at her estate sale 3 years ago. Even my first camera. A little digital point-and-shoot I'd bought at Best Buy when I was 16 and dreaming of becoming a photographer. Everything was arranged as if someone had been watching my life, taking notes, preparing the space specifically for me. I stepped into the room and the door swung shut behind me with a soft click. The silence was absolute, not just quiet, absent of sound in a way that made my ears ring. I could hear my heartbeat, my breathing, the rustle of my clothes as I moved. But underneath it all was that deeper silence, like the room was actively absorbing sound. I walked to the couch. My couch from college. The brown microfiber sectional that had cost me 3 months of part-time wages at the campus bookstore. I ran my hand along the armrest, and it felt exactly right. The same slightly rough texture, the same small stain near the corner where I'd spilled red wine during finals week my junior year. How was this possible? I pulled out my camera and started taking pictures. The flash seemed dimmer in this impossible space, but I could see the images appearing on my LCD screen. The furniture looked exactly as I remembered it, down to the smallest details. That's when I noticed the photographs. They were scattered across my grandmother's coffee table, the glass-topped one with the ornate metal legs that she'd been so proud of. Dozens of photographs, and they were all of me. Me as a child, playing in my parents' backyard in Salem. Me in high school, at the photography club meeting where I'd first learned to develop film. Me in college, studying in the library, unaware that anyone was watching. Me at work, photographing houses, including several shoots I'd done just in the past few weeks. And then, photos I didn't remember being taken. Me sleeping in my apartment. Me grocery shopping at the Whole Foods on Hawthorne. Me walking my neighbor's dog when she was out of town last month. Someone had been watching me, following me, documenting my life in ways I'd never noticed. But who? And how had they created this room? How had they gathered these pieces of my past? I picked up one of the photographs. A close-up of me sleeping that must have been taken from inside my bedroom. My hands were trembling so badly I almost dropped it. That's when I heard the breathing again. It was coming from deeper in the room, from the shadows beyond my grandmother's rocking chair. Slow, deliberate breaths that seemed to pull the air from my lungs with each inhale. I raised my camera and took a picture in that direction, hoping the flash would illuminate whatever was hiding in the darkness. The flash fired, and for just a moment, I saw something that made my legs nearly give out. A figure sitting in the shadows, tall and impossibly thin, wearing clothes I couldn't quite make out, but its face was mine. Not similar to mine, not a twin or a doppelganger. It was my face, exactly, down to the small scar on my chin from when I'd fallen off my bike as a 7-year-old. But the expression was wrong. The eyes were too wide, too knowing. The smile was too broad for a human mouth. The flash faded, and the figure vanished back into the darkness. But the breathing continued. I backed toward the door, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might burst. I needed to get out of this room, out of this house, back to the real world where impossible rooms didn't exist, and strangers didn't watch me sleep. I reached for the door handle, but my hand passed through empty air. The door was gone. I spun around, pressing my back against the wall where the door should have been. The room stretched out before me in all directions now, infinite and impossible. My furniture, my memories, my life scattered throughout this space like exhibits in some twisted museum. And somewhere in the darkness, something wearing my face was watching me with eyes that held knowledge I didn't want to understand. The breathing grew louder, closer, and I realized with growing horror that it was beginning to match the rhythm of my own panicked gasps. I don't know how long I stood pressed against that wall, waiting for the door to reappear. Time felt meaningless in that impossible room. My phone showed 1:15 p.m., but that couldn't be right. I'd only been inside the house for how long? The numbers on the screen seemed to shift when I wasn't looking directly at them. The breathing had stopped, but somehow that was worse than when I could hear it. At least then I knew where the thing wearing my face was hiding. Now it could be anywhere in the vast darkness that surrounded my island of familiar furniture. I forced myself to move away from the wall. Standing there, paralyzed, wasn't going to solve anything. I needed to explore, to understand what this place was and how to escape it. As I walked deeper into the room, more of my possessions became visible in the strange, sourceless light that seemed to emanate from everywhere and nowhere. My childhood bed with the purple comforter I'd loved so much. The desk where I'd written my first short stories in high school. Even my car. My old Toyota Camry that had died 2 years ago. Sat in what should have been the center of the room. But it wasn't just my things. As I looked closer, I realized there were variations. Multiple versions of the same objects, each slightly different. 3 versions of my college couch. One was the brown microfiber I remembered, but another was burgundy leather. And the third was covered in a floral pattern that seemed familiar but wrong, like a memory that didn't quite belong to me. 4 versions of my grandmother's coffee table. The glass-topped one I knew, but also one made of dark wood, one painted white, and one that looked like it had been carved from a single piece of driftwood. And the photographs. There were so many more photographs now. They covered every surface, scattered like leaves after a storm. But these weren't just pictures of me. They were pictures of other me's. Me with blonde hair instead of black. Me wearing glasses I'd never owned. Me standing in front of houses I'd never seen, with people I'd never met, living lives I'd never lived. In one photo, I was wearing a wedding dress, standing next to a man I didn't recognize. In another, I was holding a baby that looked like me but couldn't be mine. There was even one of me in a cap and gown, graduating from a university I'd never attended. Each photograph felt real, felt like a memory trying to surface in my mind. But they weren't my memories. They belonged to other versions of me, other Sarah Chens living other lives in other places. Do you understand now? The voice came from directly behind me, and I spun around to face myself. She looked exactly like me, down to the clothes I was wearing and the camera hanging around my neck. But her eyes held a depth of knowledge that made me feel like a child staring at the ocean for the first time. Who? What are you? I managed to whisper. I'm you, she said. And her voice was my voice, but with an accent I couldn't place. Or rather, I'm one of you, we all are. As she spoke, more figures emerged from the shadows. Dozens of them. All wearing my face, all dressed differently, all moving with slightly different mannerisms. One walked with a confidence I'd never possessed. Another seemed nervous, constantly adjusting glasses that looked familiar on my face. A third moved with a grace that suggested years of dance training I'd never had. This is impossible, I said, but my voice sounded weak even to my own ears. Is it? Asked the first Sarah, the one who'd spoken to me. You're a photographer. You understand better than most that reality is just about perspective. Change the angle, adjust the lighting, and suddenly the same scene tells a completely different story. She gestured to the room around us, to the impossible collection of my life's possessions in all their variations. Every choice creates a path, she continued. Every decision splits the timeline. What if you'd chosen art school instead of journalism? What if you'd moved to California instead of staying in Oregon? What if you'd said yes when David Martinez asked you to prom instead of being too shy to answer? David Martinez. I hadn't thought about him in years. He'd been in my AP photography class senior year, and I'd had such a crush on him. But when he'd asked me to prom, I'd panicked and mumbled something about already having plans. You remember, said one of the other Sarahs, the one with the confident walk. In my timeline, I said yes. We dated through senior year, got married after college. We have 3 kids now. She pointed to one of the photographs on my grandmother's table. The one with me in a wedding dress, standing next to a man I now recognized as an older version of David. But that's not possible, I said. We never. In your timeline, said another Sarah, this one wearing the glasses. But there are infinite timelines, infinite possibilities. Every choice that could be made is made somewhere. And sometimes the walls between those possibilities grow thin. I looked around the room with new understanding. This wasn't just a collection of my possessions. It was a crossroads, a place where all the different versions of my life intersected. Why are you showing me this? I asked. The first Sarah smiled, and it was my smile but somehow sadder. Because something is wrong, she said. The walls between the timelines, they're not just thin here, they're breaking down, and when they collapse completely, all the possibilities will merge, finished another Sarah. All the choices, all the lives, all the different versions of reality will try to exist in the same space at the same time. It will tear everything apart, said a third. I thought about the house, about how it had felt bigger on the inside than it should have been, about the staircase that seemed to stretch as I climbed it, about the door that led to a room that couldn't exist. "This house," I began, "is one of the weak points," confirmed the first Sarah. "A place where the barriers are failing. And we're sensitive to it. That's why you were drawn here. That's why Marcus got that emergency call." "Marcus," I said. "But he's my agent. He's real." Several of the Sarahs exchanged glances I couldn't interpret. "Is he?" asked the one with glasses. "Think about it. Really think. How long have you known him? What do you actually know about his life outside of your work together?" I opened my mouth to answer, then stopped. "Marcus Rodriguez, my real estate photography agent. He'd been sending me jobs for, how long? I could remember dozens of conversations with him, texts and emails and phone calls. But when I tried to think of specifics, the memories felt vague, like trying to remember a dream. Had I ever met him in person? Had I ever been to his office? Did I even know what he looked like?" "The breakdown is accelerating," said the confident Sarah. "Soon, this house won't be the only weak point. The effect will spread, reality will start to unravel everywhere, unless what? Unless one of us stays," she said quietly. "One version of Sarah Chen has to remain here to hold the barrier in place, to keep the timelines from collapsing into each other." The room fell silent except for the soft sound of my breathing. Or was it all of our breathing, synchronized across infinite possibilities? "It has to be you," said the Sarah with glasses. "You're the one who found this place first. You're the anchor point." "But I can't," I said. "I have a life. I have work, friends, family." "So do we all," said the confident Sarah sadly. "But if we don't act, soon none of us will have anything." I looked around at all these versions of myself, all these lives I could have lived, all these choices I could have made. Each one was real. Each one was valid. Each one was me. But they were asking me to give up everything I knew to save everything that could be. The photographs on my grandmother's table began to flutter, as if stirred by a wind I couldn't feel. The room itself seemed to be holding its breath, waiting for my decision, and somewhere in the distance I could hear the sound of reality beginning to crack. The photographs were moving faster now, swirling around the room like a tornado of possibilities. I watched my faces, all my faces, blur past in an endless stream of lives I'd never lived. "How long do I have to decide?" I asked, but my voice was nearly drowned out by the sound of reality grinding against itself. "Not long," said the first Sarah. Her image was becoming translucent, like she was fading away. "The convergence is accelerating. Can you feel it?" I could. The room was shrinking and expanding at the same time, the walls breathing like living things. My grandmother's furniture was flickering between its different versions. Wood, glass, painted, carved, all trying to exist simultaneously. And I was changing too. I could feel other memories trying to surface, other choices attempting to overwrite my own history. For a moment, I remembered being married to David Martinez, could taste the champagne at our wedding reception. Then that faded, replaced by memories of living in Seattle, working as a photojournalist for the Times. "Stop," I said, pressing my hands against my temples. I can't hold all of this." "That's why one of us has to stay," said the Sarah with glasses, though her voice sounded like it was coming from very far away. "To maintain the separation, to keep the timelines distinct." I thought about my real life, my actual timeline. My small apartment in southeast Portland with the exposed brick walls and the plants I kept forgetting to water. My work, photographing homes for families who were starting new chapters in their lives. My Tuesday morning coffee at Powell's. My weekend hikes in the Columbia River Gorge. My monthly dinner with my parents in Salem. It wasn't a perfect life. I was single at 32, still figuring out what I wanted to do with my career, still paying off student loans from a degree I wasn't sure had been worth it. But it was mine. Was it worth sacrificing to save all the other possibilities? There has to be another way, I said. If there is, we haven't found it, said the confident Sarah. And we've been looking for... How long now? Time works differently here. I pulled out my camera and looked at the photos I'd taken. The normal rooms of the house appeared exactly as they should, but the images of this impossible room showed something different now. In each photo, I could see the other Sarahs, all the versions of myself standing together in this space between realities. And in the background of every image was something I hadn't noticed before. A figure in the shadows, watching us all. It wasn't wearing my face this time. I couldn't make out its features at all, but I could feel its attention like a weight pressing down on the room. "What is that?" I asked, showing the images to the other Sarahs. They all turned to look, and I saw fear in their eyes. My eyes, for the first time. "We don't know," whispered the first Sarah. "It's been there since the beginning. Since the barriers first started to weaken. We think it might be what's causing the breakdown. Or what's been waiting for it," added another. The figure in the shadows began to move closer, and with each step, the room became more unstable. The furniture flickered faster between its versions, and I could feel reality starting to unravel around us. "Choose," said all the Sarahs in unison, their voices creating a harmony that was beautiful and terrifying. "Choose now, before it's too late." I looked at my camera again, at the impossible images stored in its memory. Then I had an idea. What if, I said slowly, what if, instead of one of us staying, we all stay? "That's impossible," said the Sarah with glasses. "We can't all exist in the same space." "Not in the same space," I agreed. "But in the same photograph." I held up my camera. Photography is about capturing moments, preserving them. What if I could capture all of us, all our timelines in a single image? Freeze this moment before the convergence, preserve the barriers between realities? The other Sarahs looked at each other, and I could see the possibility dawning in their eyes. "It might work," said the confident Sarah slowly. "If the image contained all the timelines, it could serve as a map, a template for how reality should be structured." "But it would require perfect timing," warned another. "And you'd have to include the shadow figure. Whatever it is, it's part of this now." I nodded, raised my camera, and began adjusting the settings. I'd need a long exposure to capture everything, all the timelines and possibilities layered on top of each other. The shadow figure was almost upon us now, and I could see its face for the first time. It wasn't human, but it wasn't entirely alien either. It looked like what might remain after all. Identity had been stripped away, all choices unmade, all possibilities collapsed into nothing. "Ready?" I asked. The other Sarahs nodded and began to arrange themselves around the room, each one representing a different choice, a different path, a different version of the life I could have lived. I set the timer on my camera and placed it on my grandmother's coffee table, then took my place among the other versions of myself. The flash fired, and for a moment that lasted forever, I felt connected to every choice I'd ever made, and every choice I'd never made. I was the photographer and the subject, the observer and the observed, the one who stayed and the one who left. When the light faded, I was alone in the room. The other Sarahs had vanished, but I could feel them. Not gone, but incorporated, woven into the fabric of reality in a way that felt right. The shadow figure was gone too, trapped in the photograph like a genie in a bottle. I picked up my camera and looked at the image I'd captured. It showed the room as it truly was, a nexus point where all possibilities converged. But now, instead of chaos, there was order. Each timeline was distinct but connected, separate but part of a greater whole. The door reappeared behind me with a soft click. I gathered my equipment and walked back through the impossible hallway to the normal staircase. As I descended, the house felt different, smaller, more real. By the time I reached the front door, 1247 Maple Street felt like just another house again. I drove home in a daze, uploaded the photos to my computer and sent them to Marcus Rodriguez. He responded within minutes. Perfect as always, Sarah. Sellers thrilled, payment sent. But as I looked at his email, I realized I still couldn't remember ever meeting him in person. 3 weeks have passed since then. The house sold quickly to a young couple from California. I drove by last week and saw them moving in, laughing as they carried boxes up the front steps. They looked happy, normal, unaware that they were living in a place where reality had once nearly collapsed. I never developed that final photograph. It's still on my memory card waiting. Sometimes I think about looking at it, about seeing all those other versions of myself preserved in digital amber. But I'm afraid of what else I might see in the shadows. Because here's the thing I haven't told you yet. The thing that keeps me awake at night, staring at the ceiling of my small apartment in southeast Portland. I keep getting calls for emergency photography jobs. Always the same pattern. Double rate, seller desperate, house that's been difficult to photograph. And each time the houses feel wrong in ways I can't explain. Last week it was a Victorian in the Alberta district with rooms that were bigger on the inside than the outside. Yesterday it was a mid-century modern in Selwood, where the hallways seemed to rearrange themselves when I wasn't looking directly at them. And always, there's Marcus Rodriguez, sending me into these impossible places with messages that feel more like memories of messages than actual communications. I think I'm still in that room. I think all of this, my apartment, my life, my work, is just another photograph, another captured moment in an endless collection of possibilities. And somewhere in the shadows of reality, something is still watching, still waiting, still collecting images of lives that could have been. The question that haunts me isn't whether I made the right choice in that impossible room. The question is whether I ever really left it at all. Have you ever felt like your life was being photographed by someone you couldn't see? Have you ever climbed a staircase that seemed to lead somewhere other than where it should? If you have, maybe you've found one of the weak points too. Maybe you're already part of the collection. And if you're brave enough to look for 1247 Maple Street, well, just remember that some doors, once opened, can never be closed again. What would you have chosen? What version of your life would you sacrifice to save all the others? Let me know in the comments below. If you're still living in a reality where comments are possible,